Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Data Champions Online, the leading online event for senior data and analytics executives. We have a jam-packed week of presentations from some of America's leading data and analytics leaders. So before we kick off today's next session, I just wanted to run through some housekeeping. We will be stopping for a 10-minute Q&A at the end of each session, so please submit your questions via the Q&A box on your webinar interface. If we don't have time to get to all the questions, we will try to respond to them by email after the session has ended. Next, I'm very happy to introduce our second session, finding out how you can be an agent of change, getting buy-in from the CEO to the intern. We are joined by Thom Keehan, VP of Enterprise Quality and Operational Excellence at Daikin Applied Americas. Thom has been involved in change management since '93 and is a firm believer that change starts and ends with people. More recently, he has spent the last 6 months building the performance data and metric trees for a manufacturing site. Before I pass things over to Thom, I just wanted to kick off with a quick polling question. How well has your organization embraced data from top to bottom? Do you feel that you're either extremely data-centric or it's still a work in progress? Please take a second to submit your answer. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you feel like it's still a work in progress, 75%, with 25% feeling that you're already extremely data-centric. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Thom and let him take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm really excited to be talking to everybody today. I'm a big believer in the use of data. I'm more of a big believer in the use of data that everybody understands. And I love the forum that you've created to get the conversation going around how important data is inside of companies and how well, we want to lead it inside of a company. So we'll go to the first slide to start with, slide 31. And really, to me, data is just a really important tool to be able to say we're measuring something, we're observing something, and we want to be able to make sure that in a very simplistic way, we understand it, we can use it to speak to us inside of the process to let us know what exactly is happening, and we can then use the information to really tell a story as to what's going on. So data comes, in a couple of different forms. You can have attribute data or continuous data. So they both have that opportunity to really help us, to understand what's going on. So now I'll go to slide 32. And really that whole point of what decision-driven is really about. It's really about helping to understand where my data is, how do I get a hold of it, how do I put it into the right sequence of events so that I can start to construct that story. Data is very powerful anytime we're trying to make a change inside of the organization. Just one moment, please. I'm having a connection issue and I can't seem to advance the slides. Just a moment while I see if I can't figure that out real quick. Yeah, I'm very sorry about that. So I'm on slide 32 of the presentation. I'm going to have to ask April and Sam to help me out a little bit and to advance the slides as we go along. So that slide that we're on, slide 32, that is kind of the pyramid of approach on how you would start with data-driven decision making. First, you have to figure out the proper way to collect your data. And by collecting the data, you can start to organize it to see, what it is that this process is telling you. Then you need to, after sorting it, you need to actually go into the interpretation mode and say, okay, now what is it that I need to do from this data? And that's where we get into the describe and analyze. So this data is telling us that this process is operating at this kind of capability, And then we just want to use our analytics behind it to help us solidify what it is that we're seeing. And then hopefully at the end, you would then take the data to be able to predict and validate what's going on inside of your process or any of what you're using to actually have the data speak to you. Once you get to the point where your data is predictable, you can then become very, very efficient, and you can start to optimize any kind of efficiencies that you're trying to get out of your processes. Let's go to the next slide, please. So why do we measure? Okay. If you can't accurately measure something, then it's obvious that you don't know enough about it and you can't describe it very well. If you can't describe it very well, then it's obvious that your ability to control it is not very strong. And if you can't control it, then you're really just at the mercy of chance. And that's not where we want to be. Data is very, very important for us, and it can really help us be more in line to set targets and to set goals and understand where it is that we want to go to. So we'll go to the next slide, on slide 34. And why we use data. So from a change standpoint, we're usually driving some sort of change within our environments, and we always think about how do we continually improve. So the goal is to baseline yourself, to really measure where we are now and compare to any benchmarks that we might decide that, are important for us to compare against. From that, you can then start to use the data to help you justify the need for the change. What sort of impact is it going to have? What kind of cost is it going to take? What kind of goal can we set? Within that, you can then start to see where the variations in your processes are and where your data is showing you that. And that's where you can start to say, I have a problem. This is where it is, and this is how I want to focus on it. And then, of course, evaluating and reporting on the progress is key, because keeping everybody and your people informed as to what's going on inside of it is what creates that collaboration and the acceptance of what you're trying to do. And then from that, you can then make sure that your desired change is sustained, and you can actually recognize when new actions are necessary, because the data starts to speak to you, and it starts to speak to your people so that you actually can, start to make much better judgments on what your goals and targets are. We'll go to the next page, page 35. So something I pulled out of a Harvard Business Review a few years ago, which I thought was really, really great, which is companies are vacuuming up data to make better decisions about everything from product development and advertising to hiring. That to me spoke really well, because I believe that your data is really used for your enterprise, for the holistic view as to how your environment or your company is going. They went on to say that in a report on big data, the authors found that companies in the top third of their industry in the use of data-driven decision-making were on average 5% more productive and 6% more profitable than their competitors. Very, very important. Those margins that we now work on against our competition and against what else is out there in the marketplace can really be the decision between how well you stay in business and for how long you can stay in business, and also what type of transformation you can make as a next step up that you might want to take as well. On the next page, page 36, the whole use of statistics is really important. So I was trained a lot in Six Sigma back in the early 90s, and there was a lot of statistics that were thrown at us over the course of the Six Sigma initiative. And really, we measure to get the data. That's what's really important to us. And then we take that data and use the statistics to convert it into usable information. And that's really key. It's not just the data that you want to be able to see, but what's the story that it's starting to tell us. And from those statistics, you can pick the right ones at the right level to be able to convey your message or your story. Next page, page 37. At the beginning, one of the most easiest things that I believe you can do is just capture these 4 data points. And from here, you can start to get a little bit more of an understanding of where you need to go to. So these four are the mean, the average, the median, the middle point, the standard deviation, and the 95th percentile of your data. So as an example, if your mean is 5, your median is 5.1, your standard deviation is 0.5, and your 95th percentile is 5.7, you have a very controlled process. You don't have your outliers. Your bell curve is very tall. Conversely, if you have a mean of 5, a median of 6.5, your standard deviation is 12, and your 95th percentile is 30, you know you have so much variation inside of that process that there's a lot of cleanup work to do. So this is kind of a great place to start, and it's a great way to have just about everybody in your environment be able to look at it and understand it, because this data can immediately show you what the shape of your bell curve is and what you have up against you. So this is one of the things that I really truly learned out of the whole Six Sigma initiative, was starting at the very top with the most basic data that you can find and start to work your way down so you follow a path down to the root cause problem, rather than collecting so much data and hoping that it affects what you're trying to get at the top line. The next page, please, 38. So the importance of good data is critical. The power of good data is what we can do with it. So that ladder of understanding what happens if you don't have any data, then you're just guessing. And like we said before, you're at the mercy of chance. Once you start to collect the data, you look at the numbers to decide, do they make sense? Can you start to see any kind of trends or patterns as you group the data? And then you can start to use descriptive statistics. This is where you start to analyze the results and gain insights as to where some of your more root causes or critical areas to focus on are. And then as you start to get more advanced and you can start to use inferential statistics, you can start to predict how the process performance is going to go. And this applies just about anywhere inside of a business that has any kind of processes, from human resources to finance to engineering to manufacturing environment. But really, it's a holistic way to start looking at how you approach data as a whole. We'll go to the next slide, please, on 39. So really, that data-driven decision-making, it's about first starting with collecting the data, recognizing the data types that you have, what's working well for you, what's not working well for you, and you start to develop a data collection plan. So this is what we would call your measurement system analysis. This is where you have the ability to collect it and make sure that it is good, that you do not have any discrepancies with how your data comes together as you put it through your measurement system. Then the next step is to interpret the data. Make sure that you are able to convert your data into usable information. And as usable information, that means it's advertisable. You have a way to put a story in front of anyone to say, this is what we're seeing, and this is why we actually want to go work on this. And then you start to use a little bit more deeper statistics to gain some more insights as to what you can do differently for process performance. That takes you into the next one, which is really describing and analyzing the process and the performance inside of the process, where you start to group and graph all of your data sets and start to make sure that they're all in like kinds, and you have the ability to start manipulating them to understand what the effects are from the input to the process to the output of the process. And this is where you start to really see the patterns and trends, because you're getting repetitive repeats of the data that you're collecting to start to see any kind of outlier effects that you might have that affects your performance. And then once you get to the point where you have no discrepancy, you feel like your data is valid and predictable, this is where you start to make big improvement across your processes and across the enterprise, and you can start to make much more informed decisions on how to go next. So it's really a critical point. Now, I wanted to talk about how we use data to accept change, on the last page that I have, it's really about how are you operating in an excellent way. So I call this the closing the loop with continuous improvement. So the first thing that you need to do is get your data around your people. That's the accelerating change. And it's really to understand why we're making a change and how well you can get your organization to acceptance mode. That first set of data really helps you fulfill whether or not you have the right momentum to drive through this change. And that's the kind of data that becomes a little bit more binary and a yes, no, or a good, bad, and making sure that your people are the one that your data is coming from. Then you get into lean, which I hope a lot of people know about, and that's the elimination of waste. And this is where we start to see a lot of performance data across our processes from input to output. And then to make sure that we use the right problem-solving methodologies for the problem that we have at hand, and then take that data, do all the analytics we've talked about over the previous slides, and then use that to go right back to the accelerating change, to the lean, to the problem-solving methods to say, this is the data we collected, this is how we analyzed it, this is why we made the decision that we made to go on, and let that become your repetitive process as you go through. So it's really a critical component because a lot of people take this operational excellence and call it a continuous improvement method, which really operational excellence is about the best that you can operationally become as an enterprise of a company. And so that use of data from a very simplistic way to show everyone this is what it's doing for us, and then to start going deeper with more analytics that you need to do, I feel that this is really the method that closes it all and keeps everybody informed as to how we're performing, what we need to do better on, and what's our optimum that we can strive for. And with that, I'm going to close it out on my last page, which is questions and answers.
Great. So we do have a few questions. A reminder to everyone to please submit additional questions via the little widget at the bottom there, and we will get those answered for you. So first question, I know you had mentioned in your bio that early on in your career you did some change acceleration training that's been really helpful for you. Can you share any tips and tricks from that people can take into their own organization?
Yeah, that is something I learned. I will tell you within the first 30 days of joining GE when I first did, and they had a method they called change acceleration process. And it was really about the acceptance of the organization and the people with whatever change you were bringing on. It is a balance of any kind of technical, political, and cultural influence that you have, whether or not we can technically make the change, politically, what do we have going on, and culturally, are we able to do it in the right manner? There's a lot of data that you collect on stakeholder analysis to make sure your stakeholders are in line, supporting what kind of behaviors that you want to see more of or less of, and what is it that we need to strive to actually be successful and achieve the change that we're trying to make. This data that you get inside of that is all people-centric and really allows you to first understand if you're ready to start driving a change into the organization. And that's a really important one to take. And I always start out any kind of change or new endeavor or any kind of major transformation that I'm trying to do by spending a month or two of that, because the whole method is really focused on the transition state, which is from current to future, and there's not many methods that cover that. We talk about the current state, mapping out a future state that we want to achieve, but we don't really have a process besides an action plan to get us there. This methodology is really, really good at putting people through the transition state between the current and the future.
Have you ever struggled with getting buy-in for a data-related decision or purchase, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, some of the hardest ones are, of course, when your data is telling you that you're not performing to the level that you should be. And that usually puts people on a big defensive mode. How you are able to change the culture to embrace what I would call embrace the red culture, meaning I want to know what's red so I know what to focus on. And the data that's in there helps me make that decision that, yes, I do have a problem, or no, I don't have a problem. But when you typically have the answer that, yes, I do have a problem, that gets people in sometimes leadership very defensive and very concerned. And then you have to start using a little bit more of the people-centric change methodology to help move people beyond that, because it can be quite a barrier. It can be, very nerve-wracking and anxious for people. So you have to make sure that that data is available, that you trust it, that you stand behind it, and that you have a plan to do something about it. And that plan to do something about it is critical, because a lot of times we just show what's red or not. The data is not telling us what we wanted it to tell us, and we don't have a plan to do something with that.
Any new insights, and maybe any that weren't anticipated, that you've been able to gain from your updated performance data on your new manufacturing site?
I think that the ability to take simple collection methods and make them electronic and visible in real time has probably been one of the best things that we could do. And really, it's about station to station, process to process, operation to operation, to get that information on what worked, what didn't work, what were we missing, what caused us to have an issue. And it goes into the system right away, and it's updated across the line and across the factory. And seeing this and having this visibility to the real-time data helps you react much quicker to any kind of issue that you need to mitigate. So I think that, as basic as you need to start as it worked, yes or no, is really a good place to start. As long as you can keep it live, you can keep it as fast as you can, because that pace of seeing data is what really helps you utilize it to make better decisions from.
Great. We do have one more question. Anyone else has any questions, please feel free to add those in. We do have some more time to answer those. There is a belief that we already use data, and I believe we do. I also believe we only use about 10% of our data to make decisions. How do we get past the belief at the executive level that we already use data?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of reports and a lot of reviews with so much data that it kind of creates what I call the Jedi mind trick. I can either see something good inside of it, or I can see something bad inside of it. And the more data you see, the more concerned I am that someone's trying to hide something in there. And I know that sounds very pessimistic, but only really a few metrics are what's needed at each process. So what I typically like to follow is a transfer function method. I like to think about y equals a function of x, and it's multiple x's that affect that. And if I can use a data set that's really about that y, meaning that biggest level metric first, then I can start to more methodically go down to where I'm having issues. And that's kind of an important point. And also to start at the input of your business or your process or your environment, so that you can see as the data goes along the process to the output before it gets to customer, you see how it's flowing through your company. And that's another critical point. It's much better to see the input and watch one piece flow itself all the way through and see what kind of data you can get along the way to let you know, am I hitting my optimum speed? Am I hitting the optimum quality that I'm capable of? Am I able to hit the optimum production that I'm trying to get? So this is important because we typically look at a lot of financial data first. And remember that financial data is mostly rear-facing. Whereas if I get my leading indicators put out there first, I can see a much better flow of how things go through the environment.
Great. And if anyone does have any other questions that they think of, just send them through to us, and we'll try to get those answered via email after the fact. Thom, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with us. Everyone, as a reminder, you will receive a link to all of the slides following the close of the full Data Champions Online event later this week so that you can revisit what you saw today. We will resume tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern with our next session, which is ML and Analytics in the Cloud, presented by TIBCO. We look forward to seeing you all then.
Great. Thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Thank you.